Hey everybody, what's going on? You are back with the brothers from the 818. It is Tuesday night. You know what that means. Time for some real conversation. My name is Dave, as you know, and we're here with my man, 50 Grand Caleb. What's going on with you, Caleb?
91331. I told you I was going to hit it with you, man. Yeah, man. I planned that all week, man. I was smirking when I was thinking about it right now. What's going on, Dave?
Man, I can't call it. It's I think Tuesdays has just become an exciting day for me, but even though it's exciting, it's long, man. I'm like, I came home with all of the things I have to do, including this podcast, and I'm thinking of all the things I have to do when we're done and leading up and through the week. But I love this day, man. This is a day I just get to chop it up with you and, you know, anybody else we're talking to. And I find myself looking at the week through a different lens just so I can make sure we have some stuff to holler about.
And I too look forward to Tuesdays because I'm thinking about the podcast. I'm thinking about, you know, topics and questions that we might ask. I know you probably will slip something in and ask me something about some music, so it's on my mind. So I'm happy, man, and I'm happy to have some guests here tonight.
Exactly. Just a general suggestion for you. I would advise you to find some different music every week because you never know what I'm going to come with.
Right.
I always want to, and I got some stuff for you today that just hit me this morning. So I was like, man, wait till I talk to Caleb tonight. I'm gonna hit him with some stuff he ain't expecting.
Hopefully you're not singing this week. That's all I got to say.
Come on, man. You know, you love my melodious pipes. You know, don't have me get my Barry White going on up in here. So anyway, it's good to holler at you, brother, as always.
Sure.
You know, we're still in challenging times, man. You know, we're seeing stuff on the news. Things are happening. It's not the unrest that it once was, but I don't want anyone, and I'm talking of any race, ethnicity, cultural background, or anything, to think just because the fires have stopped burning that people aren't still hot, right? There's a lot going on in the world. And, you know, one of the things that keeps coming up, at least in my circles, and I chase circles, is race and cultural identity, man. And you know, I've been knowing you for a long time. I think, matter of fact, we've been knowing each other longer than our guests that are on tonight have been around, right? They would have been the younglings when we was coming up. But I think a couple weeks back, maybe even a couple months, because we are on episode 12, a couple months ago, I found out something about you that I didn't know. And that shocked me. I was like, man, I could write books on Caleb as good as he can. And so we're going to get into that a little bit tonight as we discuss race and cultural identity. We could go and reveal some stuff now, but I think it would do a disservice to our guests. Tonight, we're doing a little different. So we've done just me and you. We've done the one guest that holds in the show. We did our special Father's Day episode. Let me pause on that. That show is trending, man.
Yeah.
Getting a lot of feedback from that, and folks that are just like, wow, I hadn't seen that, and this is going to bless that person. And people just are really identifying with the role of fatherhood. So I'm just really pleased that one came out the way it did. Tonight we're doing two guests, you know, at the same time. We're going to bring them in. A couple cats I think you know. One of them's name is Jose, and we got Josh. Jose and Josh, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Josh,
I can hear you.
Jose, good to see you, brother. Welcome to the brothers from the 818.
All right, thank you.
So, hey, you guys. We're glad that you guys are joining us. We're glad that we had an opportunity to kind of grab you. As we start with any guest, we just always ask a guest to kind of briefly introduce themselves. So Jose, if you would please just give us a brief introduction.
Jose. I am an employee of Los Angeles County. I'm a father of 3. I've been in the Antelope Valley for the majority of my life. I did migrate from Mexico here to the United States, and one of the stops was in the San Fernando Valley. So I am also a brother from the 818.
That's right.
What's
I
up?
love that, man. I love that. Josh, that's going to be hard to top, man. Please introduce yourself.
Wait, Josh, before you go, what part of, you said San Fernando Valley, that's a big spot, man.
Yeah, it was Panorama City, man.
The Americana, man. The bowling alley.
Right.
How many times my mama used to send me to the bowling alley with $10 to get some quarters for laundry. She
Oh,
got back $9.50 because I would use quarters to play at the arcade. That's,
yep.
yeah, Panorama City. Thank you for
Hey, Dave, you had to walk past that Tower Records on Van Nuys Boulevard.
I did. And the Mexican spot that you could only go in through the back. The door in the front was never open. Like, it was always locked. You had to go in through the back. Yeah.
Security.
Security, yeah. In 1983. Yeah. That's how Anyway, welcome to the show, Jose.
Thank you.
Hey, Josh.
Glad to be here.
So Josh, please tell us about yourself.
Sure. First of all, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here. So thank you, gentlemen. I'm 34 years old, married, only child. I grew up in the 626 out in Ballin Park. I also work for LA County. Big sports fan, big into music. I'm currently doing my second master's degree in social work. And that's just a little bit about myself.
626, is that the San Gabriel Valley?
It most certainly is.
All right, well, you're still a Valley cat. We're going to give you some love.
The original Valley.
Fernando, but, we're going to give you some love. Caleb, I can't tell you how many times we would cross that barrier over into, not necessarily the 626, but we were definitely tramping through did I use that word in a sentence?
Yeah, tramping. I heard you.
Through the San Gabriel Valley. Matter of fact, if it was Southern California, we were there. We, on a scooter.
Right.
Whole nother issue. Welcome to the show, Josh. Welcome to the show. So hey, let's just kick this off, and I like to jump right into it. Before we brought you guys in, I mentioned to Caleb that race and cultural identity is still a big factor in America, and people are going to look at you and they're going to say what you are, either in their mind or engage in conversation, or they're going to be politically correct and use a safe term to explain who you are visually and so forth. And if we're going to be honest, probably 90% of the time we just let it ride. If they get close enough, it's not worth the conversation nor the involvement / engagement to correct and to pull people down, because when you have conversations like that, it makes people uncomfortable, right? But one, we got to get past that, right? You need to be able to speak your mind, say who you are eloquently and with respect, without the worry of offending people. And then people need to learn to accept correction as a part of life. It's not a character flaw because you're wrong. Life should be a quest to become more understanding, to be wrong less, to properly identify and deal with people as they are instead of making general broad assumptions, right? Yeah. One of the things we say on this show is we need to get rid of the broad brushstrokes, right? And get a detailer's brush and get into the crevices. So if I want to come after you, Josh, with something, I'm not worried about the political fallout of how it's going to affect Jose. Because I'm dealing with Josh and I'm dealing with the straight, that straight path, and vice versa. So I'm gonna kick this off, and that's we're gonna do this round robin style, and we're just gonna open up a full conversation to who you are, right? I am a Black man, all right? I identify as Black. If somebody asks me, hey, as an African American, how do you feel about X, Y, and Z? I reply and say, as a Black man, I feel like this. And I celebrate my Blackness. That's who I am. I have no problem being Black. I love being Black. I embrace it. I sing about it. I act it. I do those things that make sure that people understand with me, it's okay. I'm Black. Caleb?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you say that when someone asks, as an African American, how do you feel? And then you come back as a Black man. That's real cool. It depends on my audience sometimes, right? Normally, I identify as an African American. I spent 24 years in the military, and I don't think that Black was an option for me on most of my forms. And so normally I identify as an African American. You've heard me say many times on this show that I'm also a patriot. And what I would really like to do is identify myself as an American, not Black, not African American, and just as an American. That would be awesome because I was born here. This is what I know. I've been to Africa. I've been to Ethiopia, but I don't identify with Africa. But I do think of myself as an African American, but more so because of my military roots as an American.
Jose?
You know what? For me, that question is kind of rooted in where I was born. I mentioned earlier, I was born in Mexico and eventually migrated, became a resident, and now I'm a citizen of the United States. So I lived predominantly most of my life here in the United States. Although I'm very proud that I'm Mexican and I have all my roots there, like I associate in both cultures. And for me, to have that conversation with the person, if they genuinely ask me, because I can come across as a stereotypical Mexican, you know, Chicano born here, but they don't know that although I'm fluent and I don't have an accent in English, I also wasn't born here. I had to learn this language altogether for me.
Okay. I'm gonna hold my question for you. I have a question for you based on what you said, but I want to give a moment to speak on his identification.
Sure. For me, that's kind of evolved through time. Growing up, I first and foremost would consider myself a Mexican American, even though biologically I'm also part Costa Rican. When I became like about teenager or my adolescence, I started identifying more as Chicano, because I felt like, you know, I could relate to those you know, images and what have you. But I think as far as like, as recent as last year, I took a trip to Costa Rica, and I had previously never known anything about the culture, never really knew anything about that side of my family or anything. But it was an experience of a lifetime, and that definitely gave me a newfound appreciation for that culture. So I also identify as that, and I think also, you know, I would say overall, I also identify as a Latino. As much as I might say, oh, I'm Mexican, I'm Costa Rican, I'm American, you know, I identify with my Latino brothers and sisters. I think unfortunately a lot of us, because sometimes our mentalities can be very divisive, right? I think some people are very much like, oh, I'm a Mexican, I'm not a Latino, you know, and I think we're focused on the differences as opposed to the commonalities. And ultimately, yep, I'm very proud to be an American. I was born and raised in this country, take great pride in this country, love this country. So that's part of who I am as well.
Now, I do have a question, but let me just throw this out as a disclaimer for us all and maybe even just myself. The purpose of this conversation is about inclusion, right? There's nothing that we're saying that is about divide or one is right or one is wrong. It's basically looking at four brothers and saying, you know, hey, how do you identify and why? And there's no judgment from either of us towards each other or toward anyone who's watching this that may identify differently. The overall goal is to really stimulate conversation. My hashtag since May 25th, when George Floyd was killed by Derek Chauvin, who at the time was an officer with the Minnesota police, is hashtag use your voice, right? And that's use your voice to educate, use your voice to speak out, use your voice to speak against, use your voice to establish your footing, use your voice to defend or offend if necessary. And this is an opportunity for the four of us to use our voice, not again to discriminate or to look down upon someone for their own identity and so forth. And what I want to just say for anybody watching, listening, and especially for the four of us, is the one commonality about all of us that we pointed out is that we're Americans, right? I was born 49 years ago. I'll be 50 this year. I was born 49 years ago in Chicago, Illinois, right? I am an American. I love being American. I've been to other countries. I'm glad to come back home to America. There's times where I'm embarrassed to be an American based upon our president. We don't have to go there, but you know what I'm saying, right? There are situations where I'm like, man, this is rough in this country, but regardless of how it feels, I wouldn't want to be anything else. So each of you mentioned, and I as well, that we are American first and foremost. The purpose of this conversation, in addition to us identifying, is just to really talk about some of those differences and what they mean. And the first one, because both of you mentioned it, and honestly, I'm just going to play the ignorant card. Sometimes I do this out of devil's advocate to stimulate conversation, but honestly, I don't know. What is Chicano? I know that I've heard of the term. I'm not ignorant to the term, but when someone says I identify as Chicano, I don't know what that means.
Go ahead, Josh.
Sure. Well, for me, Chicano basically means that you're like a first generation Latino, whether you were born here or you know, like people who immigrate here, and just identifying with the culture. And it's a lot of things, I would say. You know, it's music, it's tradition, it's beliefs, it's rituals. It's just, and also for me, growing up, you know, when you watch TV or you watch movies, you know, when you see people who look like you know, and kind of like the labels that have been imposed on them, you kind of tend to internalize those things, you know? So when I would see Mexican Americans, you know, on television, they were oftentimes referred to as Chicano. And from what I understand, and I could be mistaken, but I think originally it was like a derogatory term. And I think that it was ultimately kind of just repackaged and taken over, you know, by the community, right? And you know, we're the ones who redefine what that means. And to me, it's a sense of pride to be a Chicano. You know, I know growing up, there was people who like looked down on speaking Spanish and things like that. And I've always just took pride in that, and I never let those things deter me from you know, having love in my heritage and my roots.
Hey, Dave, I think that's interesting. You know, I grew up in Pacoima, right? Born in San Fernando, my entire life, man. Well, not my entire life. All of my childhood, my teenage years was in Pacoima. And I grew up around Chicano, Latinos, Hispanics, Mexicans, Mexican Americans, right? And I didn't know the difference, right? I just considered that we have these things in common. Like Dave said, we're American, but the four of us, we're also brown, right? And you know, brown people in this country is often looked down, and it's sometimes, you know, there's some negative connotation, and we do it within our own culture, right? Because someone's light brown versus dark brown, and I know that's happened. I think it's kind of funny when I think about like Asians tripping on their color, you know, and trying to stay the whiter because it represents wealth, right? Because the people that are darker is out in the field. So I think it's interesting with me growing up in Pacoima, and I didn't trip on any of it, but I didn't know any difference either.
You know,
No, I agree. Sorry, Dave, I didn't mean to cut you off. But for me growing up, obviously I had to adapt from knowing nothing but Spanish and kind of just getting thrown in the water and learning how to swim. So all of my friends all spoke nothing but English, and I was able to assimilate. But the term Chicano for me meant a sense of pride because I was stuck in the middle. I was of Mexican-born origin and growing up here in the U.S., so I was not Mexican enough because I'm not living in Mexico, and I'm not American enough because I wasn't born in America. So for me, that was always a struggle, and associating myself with the Chicano movement gave you a sense of pride that I wasn't the only one that had to go through this trial and tribulations from migrating, you know, being first generation and having experienced the racism and institutionalized racism, but opening your eyes, you know. And for me, I felt proud in learning about the Brown Berets and then learning more about African-American culture, because believe it or not, when we first moved here, we lived in Pacoima also, and we stayed in the projects, and all my friends were nothing but Black people. We all were just hanging out together and learning from each other, you know what I'm saying? So for me, that's how I purposely was like, Chicano was a sense of pride.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned like that. One, Caleb and I used to walk through them projects every day, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Exactly.
But as kids, unless you're taught, Your friends are your friends.
Hey, wait, Dave, let me just say this before you continue. We used to walk through them, but he lived in them, right? So yeah, okay, all right. I just want to acknowledge that, man.
Yeah,
That's
lived
a
in
big
them.
difference, man.
But as kids, unless you're taught differently or taught, for lack of a better word, to hate, your friends are your friends. Some of them are black, some of them are white, some of them look like whatever they look like. Caleb mentioned growing up in Pacoima, and growing up, and he knew some Mexicans, he knew some Chicanos, he knew some Hispanics, he knew some Mexican Americans, and they were all Mexican, right? I mean, that's just the way it was. I grew up in Chicago, and until I moved to California, I knew, and I grew up on my block. So it wasn't like I was traveling all around the city exploring, right? I left Chicago when I was 13 years old. And so my experience was my block. You know who lived on my block? Black people, right? So in certain areas, I saw some white people, so I knew they existed. And then we had a large Puerto Rican population. So when I came to California and lived in Pacoima, I was like, wow, it's a lot of Puerto Ricans around here, right? And not from any level of disrespect, but that was my understanding of what brown people were, or people who were of Hispanic descent. I learned quickly that Hispanic descent, covers a broad range of individuals, and it kind of taught you as you go. And so I think we've all, the longer you've been around, the longer you played the game, did the dance around. How do we refer to someone who looks like the stereotypical X, right? So there was a time we referred to Asian people as Oriental, right? But that's wrong. That's not politically correct. We referred to Hispanic people as Mexican, but some people will correct you. I'm not from Mexico. I'm from the Dominican Republic. I'm offended that you would call me Mexican. Okay. And again, respectfully so, it'd be like if you truly identified with your Costa Rican culture, Josh, and I kept saying Mexican. Like, I don't have, my parents are from Mexico, their parents are from Mexico, I'm from Costa Rica. And, so how do we identify with that? And again, part of this conversation is to educate and explain and, offer some allowances, but also some understanding on where a lot of that comes from. Slight shift. You guys talked about Chicano, and I appreciate the understanding of that. And what I really grasped from that, I don't want to take away from a lot of the things that you said, but one, being a first generation, and two, there was a pride that went along with being Chicano because it established a heritage, right? And an identification. And now in a world where some may look at you differently or try to hold you down because of the color of your skin or the texture of your hair or the sound of your voice or the fact that you speak a little differently than someone else. You found a word that had a cultural attachment to something to be proud of from where you're from, right? As Black people, and I'm not pushing the Black agenda. I'm just saying, as Black people as a people group, we've gone through so many cycles of that, right? We were slaves, and then we were Negroes, and out of Negroes we became Black, and we became colored, and out of colored we became Black, and out of Black we became African American. And it's always been an adjustment according to the time to add to a positive identification for who you are, and more importantly, who you should be proud to be. Right? So if you talk to my father, who's 87, he might look at you in the eye and say, I'm a Negro. That's just the way it is. Because maybe, and I don't know, honestly, I've never asked him. Next time I talk to him, I will, right? But I've never asked him, but he may culturally identify with a time when he was raised where he was comfortable being called X. And so if I referred to him as an African American, he might punch me across the room because he'd be like, get that new agenda out of here. That's something you youngsters talk about. And anytime anybody wants to refer to me at 50 as a youngster, I'm going to receive it, right?
You're not young, because you're no longer young.
So if you're going to refer to me as a youngster, these gray hairs prove differently, but I'm going to receive it. But again, I really respect the view of that, and thank you for answering the question of Chicano, because I can understand that, because as a people group, we have latched on to different names, all to establish pride and a cultural reference as to who we are and where we come from. So.
And I think about the heritage piece, And this is not a conversation that we often have with each other. Like Dave said that he learned something new about me, and I'm assuming that I identify as African American, right? And you know, some people know exactly why they identify, right? And some people just is kind of like, this is who I am, this is my family, this is what we always called each other, right? And so as I started thinking about this, I landed on this probably because of my military. But I talked to another another cat that I grew up with, and I asked him, I said, man, I was just talking. I said, you know, something about Hispanics, and I called him Hispanic, and he took offense to it. He said, man, don't call me Hispanic. I'm Mexican, right? And with great pride. And I've known him my entire life. I'm 48 years old. I've known this cat for at least 42 years old, right? But I didn't realize that I would be offending him by calling him Hispanic. And so that heritage and how you identify or view yourself is really important.
Hey, Jose, let me ask you a question, man. You mentioned something else earlier, and you know, it's become a bad word, but in this room, we're going to use it freely. You said you look stereotypically Mexican. What does that mean? What does stereotypical Mexican mean? I mean, I look at you, and if I was to just meet you, I would play it safe. I'd be like, you know, so you're of Hispanic descent, and I would wait for you to give that either a nod or to correct me to give you a cultural identification. But I learned the hard way that, you know, everybody that looks Mexican ain't from Mexico, and so don't make that assumption. But when you say stereotypically Mexican, what does that mean to you?
I think just the way that not now, I mean, personally, my hairstyle has changed, but like, for instance, for Josh, like I used to have a shaved head, low cut too. So I always got the, you know, stereotypical, like, oh, he must be gang related. He must be a cholo, you know, something along those lines. But now that's why I grew out my hair a little bit more. I can't get rid of my tattoos. I have them. So like I said, that certain part of just the stereotype of being a Mexican is why I like, yeah, it's already a dead giveaway. People are already going to identify or automatically stereotype who I am.
Okay. What about you, Josh? Do you feel that there's any stereotypical references that apply to you?
I think to Jose's point, I think he's spot on. You know, I think that's kind of maybe, I don't know, consciously or subconsciously why maybe, even though I've always had short hair, it's been it's actually only been recently that actually like full on started shaving my head. Just because growing up, you know, there was always that label, because, you know, if my hair was a certain way or I dressed a certain way, people would automatically assume I was a gang member. You know, I remember growing up, one of my cousins that I was very close to, who, you know, you would think, you know, growing up with me, knows me for who I am and knows that I'm not those things. I remember there was a time when I was a teenager where, you know, she was, you know, telling the rest of the family that, hey, I think Josh is gang related because, you know, he's dressing a certain way, and all these assumptions that came with it, you know, and that was very hurtful, you know, for me, because, you know, one, I know I've never been those things, you know, and for someone that, you know, to kind of, you know, cast you in that kind of light, you know, it hurts. And I think, you know, to a very large degree, I've been conscious of that. I've been conscious of not shaving my head or doing things because I believe that it may attract negative attention, right? And you're going to be viewed in a different light. So it's definitely a consciousness that comes with that.
And when I was younger, I say younger, 10, 15 years ago, people called me Puerto Rican. They, you know, I'm at the club or I'm out and about. They said, hey, are you Puerto Rican? Are you Cuban? I've been asked whether or not I'm Ethiopian. And when I look at myself in the mirror, I think of myself as stereotypical African American, right? And I don't see those other things. So I think it's interesting how people kind of one day want to give you a label. You know, people are actively trying to figure you out and put a label on you.
And that's kind of the point. And the point of this conversation, that call it judgment, call it whatever you do, whatever you want. When you walk into a room, whether it's said, enunciated, acted upon, or what have you, people are going to put a label on you. Right there, this Mexican just walked in. I can't tell you how many times Caleb and I have walked in the same room and people have had a conversation with us. And the one you didn't mention, Caleb, was Dominican. I can't tell you how many times you've been asked in front of me, "Are you Dominican?"
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I know that man's mama and daddy. He black, just like me, right? And so, but again, because
I had rum on my breath, man. It's probably because I had rum on my breath.
That's what it was.
Yeah, too. But because we walk in together, you know, and at the time we're like the same height, roughly the same size, but I'm darker, you know, more chocolatey. He's more caramel complexion. Well, they both can't be black, you know, so one must be something, one must be the other. And again, it's just a cultural identification. And so I find it interesting. The other word you mentioned is another one that comes up. You said cholo.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And again, you know, I grew up in Pacoima like Caleb, and I know a lot of cats who refer to themselves as cholo. But, you know, two of my favorite movies of all time, American Me and Blood In, Blood Out, you know, they both talk about the cholo identity. And when the way you explained Chicano to me, again, my own ignorance, so no judgment in it, is what I would have thought of as a cholo. Right. But that's because that's what I've learned from movies. Right. And I've honestly never sat down with any of my friends of Latin descent. That's the term I'm going to use today. Latin descent said, "Hey, how do you identify?" It just hasn't come up. Right. In the same vein that I've been knowing Caleb 37 years, longer than both of y'all been born, by the way. Been knowing Caleb 37 years, and it wasn't until a couple of weeks ago that I found out that he mentioned casually that he identifies as African American, you know, and I think what he was saying, and maybe he mentioned it again tonight, primarily because he's a patriot. Above all, he's an American. He served in the military for 2 decades plus. He fought for this country twice, right? He's, you know, sent soldiers away and left some soldiers there. He's been on the field. I can't tell you, I mean, again, I've been knowing him a long time. And I think it was 2 years ago, we went to Vegas.
Yeah.
It was a celebration for some of the guys he had deployed with. And I've never been in an environment where I've seen someone, I mean, to me, he's just Caleb. Right? As much respect I have for him, he's just Caleb. But everybody was sir this and sir that and buying him drinks and lifting him up and holding the doors for him like he was the president walking through, and then giving me the same love because I'm with him. I'm like, man, this is a whole nother side of you, because like, and these were white guys, Hispanic guys, black guys, these were all over. And it was the identification of him as a soldier. Right. And so that patriotism from that identifies the American. I'm a patriot. You know, I believe in this country. I love this country. I've never served in the military, so it's a different lens. But, you know, again, I feel a need to say it again. None of this is anti-American. It's all just identifying where we fit within that spectrum.
Hey, I got a weird question. And so let me take it from Josh and then go back to Jose. I know Josh is currently in school. Dave, I know you're in school as well. Whenever I went to CSUN. I got my undergrad in CSUN. I got my graduate at USC. But whenever I walk in the room, and I think it's probably different for Blacks or African Americans than what we saying, Dave? Latin descent.
Brothers of Latin.
Safe word, Latin descent. I think it's different maybe for people of Latin descent, because when I went in the room, often I was the only Black male in the room. Maybe there was 2 other Black females, but I was typically the only Black African American in the room. Is that something that you guys are conscious of when you are on your college campus, or when you were on your college campus?
For me, most definitely. The majority of my classmates are women, right? And right now in the Masters of Social Work program, it's a lot of Latinas, you know, and there's also African American women. But most, you know, I'm one of the few men overall. You know, there's probably out of a cohort of 32, 35 of us, maybe 3 or 4 of us tops are men. And interestingly enough, we're all Latino men.
Mhm.
Interestingly enough, but we're definitely the minority, if you want to put it that way.
How about you, Jose?
Yeah, I mean, I've been out of school for a while, but as far as I can remember, it was kind of the same scenario. I worked during the day and went to school at night. So the night school, it was limited females, and I was predominantly probably the only male in my class at night. So it was something that I had to kind of get used to. And then predominantly they were a mix though. It was white, Latinas, some African Americans. So I've had a wide variety, but yeah, I was always the minority, and even kind of like where I work now, still only the minority.
Yeah. Sometimes we have conversations around, we have open conversations, so the topics go anywhere. For some reason, I was thinking the conversation around whether or not white privilege actually exists, right? And
Yes.
for me, I think that white privilege exists because when I'm that minority walking in a room and everyone turns and look at me, I'm thinking there's something going on with me, right? And so I know that is not the definition of white privilege, but for me to identify that there's something different about me coming in the room versus the other people that came in the room before, and because some people don't have to deal with that. So Dave, you were emphatically yes. I don't want to talk about white privilege tonight, really, but if you want to speak on it.
No, we don't have to. I think I said what I wanted to say. White privilege exists. I think that it's not a bad thing that it exists. It's a bad thing when there are white people who act like it doesn't, right?
Okay.
And I think that's just honest. But and I'll take it one step further, because again, I don't know if that's a conversation for tonight. And if we were going to have a conversation about white privilege, I'd rather somebody white be in the room and let's talk about
right.
it.
Yeah, I agree.
So I don't want to go into it, but I'll just say this. I live in a neighborhood that is predominantly white / Asian. I live in a gated community. There are 3 Black people that live in this community. 3. They all live in my house, right? And that's it. And so this is my environment. Now, the car I drive.
That's the funniest thing I've heard you say all year, man.
The car I drive. We don't got to go into it, but I drive a very nice car. And so when I leave my neighborhood, when I go to my job, when I'm walking around the different locations at my job, I am a person of privilege, right? So when I walk into different areas of my job, it's, Mr. Smith this, Mr. Smith that, what can I do for you, and so forth. When I go to the grocery store on the weekend and I got on my basketball shorts and my flip-flops, I'm Dave, right? When I'm hanging out with my boys at the pool, there's that Black father with his sons. They're so well behaved. When I went to the grocery store tonight, mask on, right? And I knew it was coming. White lady behind the counter, super friendly, old, too conversational. I get up to the counter and she says, "Wow, I can understand you so clearly, even behind your mask." And I just looked at her and I said, "Well, that's because I know how to enunciate." She says, "I know, it's just something that people just don't do anymore." And I let it go. I just walked away. Now, you can take that conversation any number of ways. And I will be the first to subscribe that there's a possibility that she could have been going there, right? But was I going to let it turn my evening into something like, here we go again, I got to deal with this issue? Nope, there was nothing I was going to say in that moment to deal with that lady. But we all have to recognize all I'm saying. We all have to recognize the privilege that we have depending upon the environment that you're in. And what I wish more white people understood is that environment that you're in happens to be the United States of America, and it happens to follow you everywhere you go, right? And there's things that you can do, get away with, expect. I'm gonna stop right there because again, we're about to go there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
So, but yes, emphatically, white privilege does exist, and I'll leave it at that.
You know, last week there was another major court ruling, and that I want to talk about. There was a ruling regarding DACA, and pretty much the Trump administration was trying to tear down everything that Obama era administration put into place to protect the dreamers. Would either one of you just kind of educate our audience on what is DACA, what are dreamers, what is that? Josh?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
I actually did, when I was doing my master's in public administration, I did a whole project and presentation on the DREAM Act and what have you. And my wife is actually a dreamer, shout outs. So from what I understand, DREAM Act, like you said, it was executive order during the Obama administration, specifically to help, to prevent the deportation of, of youth that came here as undocumented children, right? And who are productive, people in society who, are not getting in trouble, who are going to school and what have you. And it doesn't provide them a path to citizenship. It just prevents them from being detained. And it also gives them a work permit in a nutshell. It's very difficult because it's very much like a immigration limbo is how I would put it, because you can't get your residency, you can't become a citizen. You're only safe until as long as the executive order is intact, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, from what I understood with the recent Supreme Court ruling, is that even they pretty much said that the current administration, the way they went about trying to revoke DACA was arbitrary, so to speak, right? That technically they didn't go about it the right way.
Right.
Luckily, dreamers are safe right now, but there's still a lot to be concerned about, because in essence, this administration could turn back around and try again, try a different way, and it's very possible that that we would not see the same outcome if it were to be reheard by the Supreme Court. So it's, that's very stressful. And I can't imagine. We're talking about, a second ago, we were talking about privilege and growing up, I was privileged in that sense that I never had to worry about, oh, I'm undocumented, or, my parents are undocumented and they could be deported at any moment. And that reality is a very scary reality for people. My wife grew up like that, and her parents, for the longest time were also undocumented. As a matter of fact, her stepfather is still undocumented, and we're trying to work on that. And it's very anxiety provoking, because at any moment your whole life could change, right? At any moment, your parents could be deported, you could be deported, and imagine living with that constant fear,
Yeah.
the toxic stress, and it's just really unfortunate that's what it is. And hopefully, we need reform, and it's not just immigration reform. We need reform on across the board, I would say.
Yeah. You're talking about seeing the police and walking the other way. You're talking about driving 65 on a wide open freeway, right? Just to not cause any attention to you. You're talking about going into Macy's with your hands in your pocket, so it doesn't draw any attention to you, and so no one pulls you to the side and question whether or not you put anything in your pockets, right? You're talking about a constant stress, and I think you defined it as toxic stress, right? And yeah, I couldn't imagine that. This is the only country that I know, right? I came here, for example, for dreamers who come here at 2 years old, 1 year old, 2 year old, 3 year old, right? And this is the only country that they know, but this is not considered home, right? And they're at constant risk of being deported. It's just mind blowing. Thank you for that explanation.
I would imagine it's, well, first let me say I can't imagine it, right? Because it's, you know, of all the worries I have, being deported isn't one of them, right? And I don't say that to take it lightly at all. I'm just really, I'm not trying to play the I see what you mean card, right? When truly I don't. But it has to be disheartening to not only worry about, as you said, you've been here since you were 1 year old and now you're 35, being deported to a place you don't know, but for all that you've done being in this country, to be a long-lasting, upstanding citizen, you know, you have a job, you contribute to the gross national product, you do the things you're supposed to do, and to know that even after all of that, you're not looked at as an American, right? That you and then have to go even further to prove yourself to belong here, right? And that's the part where as Black people, especially in certain neighborhoods, we can identify. We're not going, is not going as far as to be deported, but you mentioned, Caleb, walking into Macy's with your hands in your pockets so as not to be judged for stealing. But now you're looked at for, why do you have your hands in your pockets? What do you do? Right?
Yeah, man. You know, I grew up, you know, I'm learning a lot about culture and ethnicity and identity. And so I have a question for Jose. Jose, I'm sure you know who Pancho Villa is, right?
Right.
You've heard of Pancho Villa, you know who Pancho Villa is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like 16, 17 years old, and I'm hearing of Pancho Villa. He's a rider, man. He's a gangster. He's a, right? And so I'm wearing a Pancho Villa. I'm wearing the shirt, right? I'm wearing the shirt. But there's some people that say, "Oh no, Pancho Villa, man, he's not. He wasn't really for the people. He's for himself." Could you speak to that? Do you know that story?
Yeah, I mean, Pancho Villa is obviously a Mexican general that he was doing his part to have his people have a voice. You know, even though he was doing it guerrilla tactics, obviously, because that's what he knew. But it personified through all of Mexico, because that's what it was. Like he was assisting and standing up for the rights of the common man. So that's why he got a lot of indigenous people on board. A lot of still were like half Aztec Indian, half Mexican, that were like being outcasted, kind of like how in America, how we do indigenous people, and we put them in their own little land and keep control of them. And in Mexico was kind of the same way. Well, then General wanted to free the brown people and said everybody needs to be treated equal, you know, and that's how he kind of took it upon himself, and that was his mission statement. So for me to know that man, I can't think of the slogan that he has, and maybe you can refresh my memory, Josh. It's something along the lines like, I'd rather live a lifetime, I can't think of it, than being on my knees or something like that. I can't think of the actual quote, but it's something that it just personifies to the Mexican people that, you know, we're going to bust our tail and, you know, and then rather be miserable and living on our knees begging for you to treat us better. Like, we're going to do it and take charge.
To add to that, I believe it was Emiliano Zapata, who was pretty much the other general at that time in Mexico, who famously said, "I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees."
Oh, there you go. That's right.
And pretty much like Jose said, you know, these two gentlemen, you know, Zapata was in the south and Pancho Villa was in the north. And, you know, this was pretty much Mexicans' independence war against Spain, right? And they were able to successfully out the Spanish, you know, and that really changed everything in Mexico.
I shouldn't assume, but I'm gonna ask, do both of you speak Spanish?
Yes.
Sure.
There was an incident that occurred maybe 10 years ago. I was a boss at my job in management and so forth, and I had to distribute a document in English and in Spanish. And so I called one of my coworkers, one of my employees who was Mexican, and she would tell you to your face, she was Mexican. I was like, "Hey, can you translate this for me?" And she looked at me in my eye and said, "What makes you think I speak Spanish?" And, you know, this is in the 2010s, right? And so I was floored, and I was embarrassed, because it was one of those, it came across the same way of somebody came in and said, Dave, I made you some fried chicken and watermelon. Here you go. Right? Like, why I gotta like fried chicken and watermelon? I made a blatant assumption that because she was self-identified Mexican that she spoke Spanish. And she was like, my mom's from Mexico, my grandma's from Mexico, but they didn't speak Mexican, they didn't speak Spanish in the house. And I never learned. I know English. And I was like, okay, well, I still need this translated, so I gotta find somebody else. And I did, and that was that. But how is that perceived in the Mexican or Latin or Hispanic culture when you find first generation individuals who don't speak the language? Is that an accepted reality? Is that equivalent to the way we look at millennials? Like, you guys are just a different generation and you do it your own way? Is it downplayed?
That's a good question.
How does that play in that community?
I think me personally, for me growing up, not being able to speak English, for me it was reverse because I learned Spanish from the get. But it did become a cultural thing that you frowned upon that because, like I said, what are you Mexican and don't know how to speak Spanish? Like, that's your whole root, that's your whole culture. So yeah, definitely was frowned upon, you know. So even some of my good friends, you know, the same way. Their parents just didn't speak to them in English. Even my relatives, nephews, that, you know, they just chose not to speak with them in English only, not Spanish. And now they're inferior. They feel like, okay, although I might identify on a checkbox on the census that I'm Latino, I'm Mexican American, technically I'm half. Or they can even put the term, Josh knows, as pocho, meaning that you're just whitewashed. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not really Mexican because you don't know how to speak Spanish, you know, kind of a deal. So that, yeah, definitely is something that's frowned upon if you don't know how to speak Spanish.
But is that, and again, I'm just asking your opinion, is that a misplaced stereotype? Is that another mechanism to divide within your own culture? Where you look at someone who looks like you, acts like you, goes to the same places you do, but when it comes to the language, they can't speak what you would call your native tongue. Is that another self-division mechanism within the Latino community that, you know, honestly needs to be addressed and dealt with?
No, definitely. I mean, that's exactly, you hit the nail right on the head. That's exactly what goes on. It's a way of dividing each other and isolating people, you know, and being like, well, you're not welcome because it's an all Mexican party and they're going to be playing predominantly all Spanish music and the people there, you know, so then that kind of deters them and then they isolate them to go, you know, in that respect. And just for an example, even in institutions, right? So there's the Southsiders are pretty predominantly like old Chicanos or old Cholos, like you associated with, right? That speak nothing but English. And then you got the Paisanos that are strictly Spanish speakers that are in the jail. You know, even there's segregation because they're not treated or harassed or forced to do other details like being a Southsider, like having to get in a fight or having to sell drugs. The Paisas are looked upon like, no, let them they don't even really affiliate with us. Just let them fend for themselves kind of a deal. And that's how it is, you know, in this light now. It's just a way of dividing, you know, our own people and just to being like, look, it's a coaching opportunity for you to empower this young man and be like, look, learn the basics. This is at least how you can have just some direct conversation with a, you know, a Latino that's predominantly all Spanish speaking.
Right. I know, Caleb, you had some other questions you want to hit. Josh, did you want to chime in on that before we jump back around?
Yeah, sure. I think everything that's been shared is on point. I also learned Spanish first, and my experience growing up or throughout my lifetime has been that, you know, people who were perceived to be, you know, Mexican or Latino who did not speak, it was definitely frowned upon. Unfortunately, I hate to paint with a broad brush, but I think, at least in my experience, a lot of times, and it's very disheartening, a lot of sometimes our own people, we're very divisive, right? Anything to discredit you or to discredit your Mexicanism or Latinoism is always brought into question. Oh, you don't speak Spanish, or you don't eat chili, or, you know, you don't eat beans, or, you know, whatever, anything that they can nitpick. And kind of like we mentioned earlier, it's kind of you're kind of, where do you fit in, right? You know, I'm too Mexican to be a quote unquote American, you know, and vice versa. And instead of us really coming together as a people and saying, hey, let's help each other out and let's embrace each other. It's almost kind of like this hatred, like, oh, this person's doing too good, and we don't like that, right? Well, why are they doing so good, right? Instead of being like, hey, one of us is coming up, like, that's great, they could pull us all up together. It's very, for whatever reason, and I think that's probably deeply ingrained into things like into like colonialism, right? And this whole buying into these ethnocentric standards of beauty and what have you, real quick, even in the Mexican culture, and, and I don't know if Jose could speak to it, a lot of times, even the whole skin tone is like a big deal, right? Especially with the older folks. It's like when they see a light-skinned baby, is like, oh, how beautiful that kid is. They're a güero, right? The little güero or güerita, they're so beautiful, right? But if the kid's a little darker skin, those same people might not be as complimenting, and it's just a lot of ignorance that we have to overcome.
Wow.
Great.
That's deep. And I didn't know where that question was going to go, but I appreciate both of your insight and your transparency with that. That's deep. Caleb, jump in there, man. We got about 10, 12 minutes to go.
And this is the time to start transitioning, man. I mean, this conversation is really much deeper than I anticipated, man. And I appreciate both of you guys sharing and really being, vulnerable and transparent in your experiences. That's really making this conversation, just the time has just really flown. I'm a 49er fan.
Click.
Unfortunately.
When you think about culture, all right, so I grew up in Los Angeles, and I'm a 49er fan, and I see, I guess there's some Ram fans out there, but I see a lot of the Latinos gravitating towards Raiders, right? Not because they're a great team, because they haven't been great in a long time. Click, right? But there's a culture, right? And bigger than the Raider culture, you can speak on that. But there's a culture around fandom, right? I think I think we probably have some things in common besides my 49ers. I'm a Laker fan. I'm a Dodger fan, and there's a culture behind that as well, right? Is that something that you also associate with when you or wear with pride, I guess? I'll start with Jose.
I mean, personally, just I affiliate myself as, like I said, being Mexican American, and I know my history. I know that this at one time was Aztlan, right? So it was, for me, I take in pride that although I was born in Mexico and I migrated to the U.S., I still am in Mexico. So for me, in that respect, like, that's a prideful thing. And I don't know, man. I just, that for me just rings that I have to represent the city that I'm from. So when I grew up here, it was the LA Raiders. And although they went to Oakland, yeah, I get that. But the Dodgers, it's the same thing about both of those teams, not the Lakers because we got 16 chips, but the always the Dodgers and always the Raiders. It's always the underdog story. And I myself always felt that was my role. I needed to prove myself in society and be a success for my lineage in my family. So I definitely migrated to the Raider Nation because they accepted you as who you were. It didn't matter what nationality, what ethnicity. It didn't matter. You were a Raider. You were part of the nation. And being the Dodger fan as well. But that for me that's why I migrated to that. Listen, we're the underdogs. This is how LA is. This is the West Coast lifestyle, and this is how we're going to roll with the underdog team.
Love that. I love that example, man. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone explain it that way. Josh, please try to answer that question.
I think Jose hit the nail on the head, man. I think a lot of us, at least myself, and the people I know and grew up with, we're homers, right? We're all for the home team. And I think maybe part of that is potentially, part of that assimilating, right? And wanting to belong and wanting to represent, and especially when you live in a city, with a Spanish name like Los Angeles, you're going to take pride in that. You're going to take pride in these teams because, like Jose said, we know the history, right? We know what was here before we called it, you know, the U.S. or what have you, you know, and it's a lot of often seen by a lot of us as a coming home, right, so to speak. And definitely that, you know, just being Mexican, there's a lot of pride that comes with that, I believe. At least that's how I grew up.
Yep.
Right? There's a tremendous pride that comes with that. And the same thing with you know, where you live, what you represent. Pride is definitely a huge part of our culture, I would say.
Yeah.
And Emma, I think that there's what I'm hearing from you. I think that I don't see the same amount of pride, and maybe David could speak to this. I don't see the same amount of pride in the Black culture and African American culture that I've heard you guys express tonight. What do you think, Dave?
I was
because you've been beaten down.
I think that's a definite answer. From the Black culture, you know, I would be bold enough to say that because Oakland is a primarily Black city, and that the Oakland Raiders started from there, and their original roots, you know, they used to have their practice field in the at the field in the projects that was next door. And so they became the Black man's team. Now, and I'm not going as far as to say that Black people everywhere identify with the Raiders because of that. I don't have enough knowledge to say that.
We don't.
You don't, right? You're Dominican though, so you don't have. But you know, for myself, I grew up in Chicago, right? But there was one dad on my block, and that dad was a Raider fan, and he taught all of us neighborhood kids how to play football, and we would go in the house and watch the game. So we became Raider fans because he was. And then I moved to LA, and the Raiders were in Oakland, and I was like, wow, they're close. And then I moved to Oakland, they came to LA. And then I moved back to LA and they went back to Oakland. I was like, you guys are running from me. But, you know, I'm still at 5-6 games a year. Now they're in Vegas. You know, no matter where they go, when they were in LA, they were the Oakland Raiders of Los Angeles. When they were in Vegas, they're going to be the Oakland Raiders of Las Vegas. I have so much Raider gear. I refuse to buy anything that says Las Vegas Raiders. And for me, it's not a cultural identification as much as the history of the game for me is tied to Oakland Raiders, or tied to being a Raider fan. But yeah, like you, Caleb, I haven't heard the cultural identification with it.
Hey man, I learned bocho, right? I also learned that if someone was going to give David a plate of fried chicken and watermelon, he might consider turning it down. I'm not turning it down, man. Bring that fried chicken and watermelon over here and call me what you want for a second. Let me
I didn't say I would turn it down. I would just be like, hey, what you trying to say? In 2 minutes, we can start with you, Josh. How important is it for your cultural identity to be passed to the next generation? Go.
I think it's extremely important. Because ultimately, you know, knowledge of self comes with, you know, who you are, where you come from, you know, your beliefs, your traditions that are passed down to you. That is our connection to our ancestors, I would say, right? Recently, my niece that I adore graduated from high school, you know, and I wrote her an extensive email, kind of just giving her life advice and trying to pass down some wisdom, you know, and one of the things that I mentioned to her is like, you know, don't ever forget for a second that, you know, the blood that runs in your veins, you know, you come from some of the greatest warriors and astronomers, you know, who've ever walked the planet, you know, and when you realize, you know, what, you know, who your ancestors were, your family and everything like that, you know, it's powerful, man. It's powerful because it's very empowering, and you could really change the world in your own way. You know, I think when people don't really understand who they are, or don't take pride in who they are, you know, then you're always trying to be something that you're not. You know, and I think that's a lot of times where insecurity happens and what have you. So I think it's very important for if I expect my kids, my nieces, the next generation to take pride in who they are and what they want to become, then I have to model that, right? And if I'm modeling that, hey, you know what, I don't take pride in my culture, and I'm just trying so hard to fit into something that I'm really not, then, you know, how are they gonna know like who they become or who they're meant to be?
It's good. Jose?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in that. That's the reason why I have my children in a dual language immersion program. I want them to make sure that they learn how to speak Spanish and are fluent in both English and Spanish, like myself, because I know how much that affords you some privileges and set you higher than the average person if you're bilingual, especially in the communities that we live. Um, Unfortunately, my children are fairly young. I've had, just to let them know who their roots are and where they come from and where I was born and where I grew up. But the next goal would be obviously to show them firsthand, to travel and to show them where the state of Mexico, where I was born, my hometown and stuff like that, so they can have a sense of pride and know that that's their roots, and then their American roots that they have here with my spouse. She's, American, so that's to have them pride in both ways, but definitely make sure that they don't forget where they come from, because I do have my son that's on the lighter shade of brown. So I don't want him to get, taken advantage of or get swept under the rug as being just, a white kid that doesn't know, where he can, throw it their way and be like, no, I understand what you're saying, and I speak Spanish as well too. So for me, it's everything. I want to make sure that my lineage continues through them, that they're contributing members of this society.
That's good speak. Jose, honestly, we got to have you come back, man. And
thank you. Appreciate it.
Josh, we had to have you back for a whole nother reason. We've talked about that before. But one of our future episodes, we want to talk about the continuation of culture through dual language immersion programs.
Okay.
And, that travels dual pathways. You have people who are native speakers who want their children to grow up making sure they're fluent in both languages. And then you have people who don't speak Spanish at all or the other language at all and want to give their children the best opportunity to become bilingual in an environment where their brains are sponges and they're more apt to learn. So I would love to discuss that with a native speaker in a future episode. So we'll be in touch about that. Caleb, wrap us up, man. We're gonna be here for a while if we keep going.
Yeah, man. We're well past the 70-minute mark. I don't want to keep the fellas any longer. I don't want to get in any more trouble than I'm already in. I'll just say that it falls on it's at my footsteps, man. For my children, I'm responsibility to teach them heritage, ancestry, legacy, and that lineage, and so that legacy lives on. And so I think that that it's more important today. I would say it's more important. I feel that it's more important right now, this moment, than I felt it ever in my life, right? And I have a 27-year-old and I have a 3-year-old, right? And I have a 1-year-old. But I didn't feel as passionate about teaching the importance of it until just this moment. And so I'll end with that, Dave.
Likewise, Caleb and I are very similar. I have a 24-year-old and a 13 and a 14-year-old, and I'm much more passionate about spreading cultural heritage to my 13 and 14-year-old because they're still here with me versus, got that COVID, versus my 24-year-old who, I mean,
pray that you don't.
Yeah, I shouldn't even say that. He's not far away, but when he was growing up as a youngster in my house, those cultural identifications weren't as powerful for me. And so it goes back to when you know better, you do better. I'm going to close with this. Josh, you mentioned something that happens in our community. And when I say our community, I mean Black and brown, but I'm sure it happens in every other community as well. That is that crab barrel mentality. When we see people doing well, it's much easier to try to push them down with your words. You think you're better than everybody else, or to minimize their achievements because we see them excelling past an area that we could or did or felt the need to put the energy into. And so what I'll say is I saw a post today that said, while others around you achieve greatness, keep clapping until it's your turn. I'll say it again. While others around you achieve greatness, keep clapping until it's your turn. Meaning that we have to learn to celebrate those around us for even the things that we feel a little envy. that we feel a little jealousy, that we may feel that there is some part about us that wants to hate on them for what they've achieved.
Wow.
Just celebrate them for who they are, because as long as we're embracing the negativity, anything that's coming our way will not be able to land on us. Think of it as a moving target. When you celebrate, you actually have to pause your own agenda to focus on another's. And when you do that, you allow whatever's coming your way to land on you too, versus if you're always moving around thinking about what you're doing, you'll never get that opportunity. So keep clapping while you're waiting for your opportunity to show up, is my final word. Josh and Jose, we want to thank you on behalf of the brothers from the 818. You guys have just really helped us do another amazing show. There's been times where Caleb and I have done a show where it's just us. This is not a show we could have done with just us. And we needed your insight. We needed your similarities, your differences. We needed your transparency and your wisdom. And I thank you both from the bottom of our heart and on behalf of the brothers from the 818. You guys rock, man. You made our show tonight. I appreciate you. I applaud you and thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank you guys. Last thing I'll say is something that David said reminded me of a quote from my friend, that he rhymes. And one of the things that he said was, I ain't got a lot, but people want to hate on mine. Remember, kid, hate don't shine.
And on that note, if you have any feedback for Brothers from the 818, you can always reach out to us at brothersfromthe818@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Brothers from the 818, Twitter at 818 Brothers. We're on YouTube, which you're probably watching this on right now. We're also on various streaming media outlets, Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, you name it, we're out there on that. But don't forget that subscribe link. We're growing slowly but steadily. And the more of you that keep tuning in, the more Caleb and I will be able to give you engaging content. On that note, we wish you guys all blessings. Josh and Jose, we again appreciate you from the bottom of our heart. 818 wouldn't be the same without you. For everyone else, keep tuning in and we'll keep showing up. Y'all be blessed.
Thank you, man.